All right, so before we get into the future, let's play a little devil's advocate here. What's wrong with the 728 by 90, the 300 by 250? I see pretty rich advertising coming through those sizes. What's wrong with what we have today?
I'll go ahead and start.
Okay.
I don't think there's anything wrong per se, especially because those two units and 5 other IAB standards are responsible for 80% of the impressions served last year. However, they, as the only standards that we have sort of run their course in that we've seen fantastic growth over a number of years, certainly in search and in display, and there's been no growth in brand advertising. And those units as they exist today as standards have no rich media functionality built in. And so brand marketers cannot do in those units as they currently exist as standards what excites them about interactive marketing, and that is interactivity. So we'd like to build on those to develop some new ones that will get that excitement.
I think the numbers kind of tell the story here. If you look at, we kind of pat ourselves on the back as people who live in digital that we've done such a great job with the growth of display advertising. But only 5 to 7% of spending comes from brand marketers, and most of it's coming from direct response marketers. So if we want to get brand marketers at the table and spending the dollars here, we need to provide places where they can really get that brand messaging across.
I was also going to say that sometimes it's not just about the banners, but also about the context. And I think a big play going into 2011 is going to be the content play. So it's not only about the actual ads themselves, but the context and the environment that they fall within and how integrated they play with that space.
Is this solely a display advertising problem, or does this problem also afflict mobile and video spaces?
I get the hot seat again. This is a difficult question for me because I'm going to speak out of 2 sides of my mouth. So at the IAB, I'm running the initiative to develop new display formats and new brand-friendly display formats. And when I go out to talk to folks, and I've been to see a lot of the companies that are in this room, everyone always says after about 15 minutes, we get it, we'll support this initiative, what can we do? Pause, pause, pause. But what are you going to do in mobile, and what are you going to do in digital video? Because we don't want to get behind the 8 ball. Mm-hmm. So we will be addressing those in 2011 from the perspective of the IAB. But for God's sake, let's fix display now.
I would say that it's definitely not just a display desktop issue. To solve for one screen, we have to solve for all. Being in the technology vertical, I know these stats off the top of my head, but 65% of new mobile phone buyers are smartphone buyers. And so it is going to be just as important to solve for the display space on the mobile phone or the mobile device as much as it is on the desktop, and make sure that those that the specs can be translatable.
Yeah, by this time next year, Nielsen predicts that smartphone penetration will actually equal feature phone penetration for the first time. So if we're not thinking about the mobile space, then we're doing that at our own peril.
Makes sense. So based on your experience, what are advertisers demanding when it comes to new ad formats?
The most interesting things for me, Zach, so having come from traditional advertising, where every summer I would trek to Cannes for the International Advertising Festival with a lot of other folks. This year at the IAB was the first year I hadn't gone in a long time, so I paid close attention to the news that was coming out of Cannes, and I can promise you that 99% of the conversations were about clients and agencies talking about how they can leverage the Web 2.0, the interactive nature of communications today. And yet, when you look at what was awarded, and you look at what those people are actually doing in paid advertising, there's an unbelievable disconnect because they simply don't view paid advertising on the web as the way to use the capabilities of Web 2.0, the interactivity, which is how they view brands being built today. And so instead, a lot of the dollars go to other folks who build different platforms for interactivity. And so a big objective of the Rising Stars program is to build into the next IAB standard ad units the ability for marketers and their agencies to do in that space what they have become accustomed to doing outside of that space, whether that's getting feedback, having a dialogue, sharing, and actually buying things.
I agree, and I think another interesting point coming from the sales side is just, it's philosophical, but an interesting one is just where those best ideas come from. And so sometimes we see some of the best ideas come from our agency partners and our marketers. So I would say a lot of it, the best ideas or the best ad unit is really about flexibility and the ability to accommodate what you not necessarily have thought of, and the ability to, and the willingness to test, measure, possibly productize, and work with the IAB on effectiveness.
Yeah, I think, looking at it from the agency side, the clients are always saying to us, what's going to make this different than what everyone else has already done? You look at what Apple did with the New York Times and the custom units that they created. If you look at what AOL was trying to do with its Project Devil, that I think had some pluses and some minuses, I think at the end of the day, what the clients want is they want something that's bigger and better. So having that flexibility is what's going to be critical, because that's going to allow the agency and its client to kind of work together to bring big ideas. And we have to find a way. And I think web technologies have finally reached a point where you can do things that are much more scalable, but yet much more customizable.
Yeah, and I think an interesting thing to measure is we talk a lot about diminishing return. Specifically, my partners on the search side get asked a lot. So, at what point have I diminished my return? Do I not need to increase my spend to capture that because I've hit saturation? And I would ask the same thing about ad units. So, at what point does the unit not need to be larger so that we know that we've gotten the most effective click-through rate or the most effective point of measurement that people care about most? Because from the sales perspective, it seems like the bigger the better the ad unit, the happier the client. But at what point is there an inflection point? I'd be curious to know.